All right. In the last video, we made a fence. There was a little bit of fixing it, right at the end where we were just kind of connecting the fence posts together, some merging, whatever, filling the hole. But everything we do, we want to work in quads. So we always want every face that we look at. So if we go to edit mode and faces, every face we can select, we want it to have 4 vertexes and 4 edges. That will make one face. Now sometimes we end up with a face that looks like it might have more than that, but there's this division in the center, so this gives us one face, 1, 2, 3, 4 vertexes, and 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. Every face should have that. No matter how difficult the image is, how difficult the model is, how difficult the shape is, we want we want each face to have 4 vertexes and 4 edges. All right, now inevitably, something happens, and while we're modeling, while we're working, we end up making a mistake and having to delete some faces. So what we're going to do in this video is just look at how to fill some of those faces that we mess up. So each of these boxes was originally 6-sided, but I've deleted one of the sides out of them. And we're going to go back and refill the hole on the side that's missing. Now, these aren't the only techniques you can use, but they should work in almost every situation. So we're going to start off, we're going to go into edit mode. And on this first box, I want to select the edges. And I want to select the top edge and the bottom edge only. And then I'm going to come to my edge option, and I'm going to tell it to bridge the edge loops. And what it's going to do is it's going to connect those 2 edge loops together with a face. Now, this is cool, right? Now we have everything together. But if we come over to here, we want to do the same thing. Select the top edge and the bottom edge. We'll do edge, and we will say bridge edge loops. Well, this doesn't quite work, right? Because now we have this edge, and the new face that we've created has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different edges. That's not what we want. So we can do it pretty easily by changing this number of cuts. So whenever you use a tool like this, there's an options down here in the lower left. If you open that options up, it gives you a bunch of choices for what to do on your design. So I'm going to increase my number of cuts by 1. And now you'll see I have an edge right there in the center. The only problem is to check whether or not these 2 edges, vertexes, are connected. And by default, they are not. So we'll hold down Shift, select the first one and the second one, and then always go back to Mesh, Merge, at last. Do the same thing over here. First one and the second one. You noticed in the last video, I made my widget disappear. Turns out that's really useful because the widget can get in your way, and then you can't click on the vertex you want to click on. So I just hit spacebar to turn it off. I selected the first one and the second one, Mesh, Merge, at last. Hit spacebar and turn the vertex back on. So sometimes it's that easy. Sometimes you're fixing a hole and you just have to select the edges and bridge them. Now this could work for 40 different edges, right? I'll do a really quick representation here. Edge, bridge edge loops. And I could have a whole bunch of different edges here, right? Now, it's not exactly what you want, right? You might have to move some edges around to get them exactly like you want, but for the most part, it's going to give you the faces to work with. Now, that was the bridge edge loops. The next one I want to talk about is something that we try to use a lot. This one doesn't work as easily as the other ones. It works really well when you just have one missing face. But if you have 10 missing faces or you just had to delete a large chunk of your model, this doesn't always work. The edge loops doesn't either. but it's a good start. But if you select all 4 edges and come up to face and then use a grid fill, then it's just going to try to put a face in where you had it before, or in the hole. It's just going to try to fill it. So if we come back to here, I can select all 6 of these, face, grid fill, and because it was able to tell that I had 6 faces instead of just 4, it went ahead and created this middle section. Now the question is, are these connected? And when you look at moving them, they are absolutely connected together. So that's a little bit better than the edge loops because it was able to fill the hole and do the math to figure out where the edges should be. But it doesn't always work. The face selection fill doesn't work every time. It's better usually, but it's not as consistent. The last one I want to show you, this is what's going to happen when all else fails. When your bridge loops doesn't work, when your fill hole doesn't work, you have to come in and just kind of fill the hole manually. So what I do in this situation is I figure out which edge I like the best. In this case, all the edges are the same, but regardless, I figure out which edge I like the best, and I extrude the edge. And you can just move it to wherever you want, right? It doesn't really matter where it goes. Just move it to wherever you want. And this is a precursor. When we get later in the semester and we start modeling terrain and cars, extruding edges is pretty much the way we go about doing it. It gives us the most control over the topology. But I'm going to select the vertexes, and we should be really familiar with this by now. Mesh, merge, at last. Mesh, merge, at last. Now again, it's really easy when it's just one face. But if you're doing that same thing, and you're doing it here, so what I did previously was I extruded this one out. So mesh extrude, right? I would have to do that a second time, right? And then I would just have to merge all of these verts together. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is I'm going to select this left side here. I'm going to do the same thing, extrude edges, and I'm going to try to put them, again, close to where I want. Now, instead of having to connect these two and then come down and connect these two, which would be 4 merges, now I only have to do 3 merges. And that may not sound like a huge difference, but if I'm working with something that has 40 edge loops, being able to cut my merges down by half is pretty important. Now, the next thing I want to show you is a little bit of a quicker move on how to connect all these merges. So if you just saw what I did, and I'll come back and I'm going to just delete some faces on this one. Right. So I've made these holes here. So what I'm going to want to come back and do is I'm going to want to grab these 2 edges over here, and I'm going to want to extrude them. Whoops. I'm going to want to grab these 2 and mesh and extrude. And then I'm going to have to grab this bottom one and do it again. So what I did there, instead of coming back up to mesh extrude, since I knew I wanted to use the tool that I had just used before, I pressed G on my keyboard. G, what it does when you're in the Maya tools or the industry tools, and I'm not familiar with what this button is on Blender tools, but in industry tools, when you press G, that just repeats your last action. So in this case, my last action was to extrude these edges. So when I select a new edge and press G, it would extrude that edge. And this goes the same for when I'm in the vertex mode. I select those two vertexes, merge at last. I can repeat that process, selecting two vertexes and then hitting G on my keyboard, and it repeats the last option that I did. In this case, the last option was merge to last. Being able to hit that G key really speeds up the process from having to come up to mesh extrude or mesh merge, whatever tool that you just used, if you're using the same tool over and over and over again. Now, the last thing I want to show you is, again, the kind of face fill tool. And we're going to see how it does in a little bit more of a real world scenario. So I have this cube here, and usually when you mess something up, it's not as clean as just deleting just this one side, right? Usually when you mess something up, it's going to look a little bit more like this kind of hole. So then how do you go through and how do you fill that hole? Well, there's the slow way where you can bridge, extrude, whatever, do a whole bunch of things. Theoretically, we would like it if we could just select all of these edges and then come up to face and grid fill. But oh goodness, did it not do a good job. It tried, it wanted to, but it's not quite there. We could do just fill, and that's kind of the same result, right? It's not quite as good as it was. We could try an edge and bridge edge loops, but it doesn't know what to do because there's no loops. So when you get a hole that's kind of a weird shape like this, filling it usually is going to take a lot more than any one of these tools. So I can select these two, and edge and bridge edge loops. That worked. I could probably do the same thing here. That worked. And now I could do it here. That worked. I have this issue now. If I select all of these, maybe now I could do the grid fill. Still doesn't quite work. So it looks like I'm going to have to probably use my extrude feature. And I'm going to start here, mesh, extrude edges. And now that I've extruded some edges, I can come back and bridge, and come back here and bridge. So now all I have to do is get this vertex and match it up. Mesh, merge at last. And all the other edges are in the right place. So I just have to figure out how to get this one vertex up in the right location. And theoretically, you'll get it pretty much where you want it. It's not going to be exact ever. It can be, but for what we're doing now, it's not exact. So, those are a few techniques to fill holes. Whenever you're modeling, you're going to end up messing something up. It is totally okay to just delete faces. You can always add faces back manually. So don't think that if you mess something up, you have to delete the whole thing. It's totally fine to come back in, select the faces that just aren't quite right, and delete them. And then all you have to do is figure out how to fill that hole. And that's the second video on filling holes, fixing problems. We have the video on duplicating using the array for the fences. And then I will post a project associated with these two videos, and we will go from there. So thanks everybody. I hope you have a good day, and we will see you in the next video.